Okay, I have that it's 12:01. So we're going to get started, and I want to welcome everybody to Broker Chat today. I'm Tom Fulkerson. I'm your qualifying broker. We have Deborah Blue, the managing broker from Midtown, on the call today. And we thank you guys for joining us today. As always, retainer fees if you have the time. Okay, will do, Deborah. As always, I like to bring things to the table that are very topical, that I'm seeing a lot of issues with as a broker. I'm sure that Deborah is seeing these same issues. And so today I want to talk about the appraisal gap stipulations that I'm seeing in contracts, and some of the funky things that are going on with contracts and the appraisal contingency. So currently, we are in one lawsuit that I'm aware of because, and I think it has to do with, I think it's Midtown, Deborah, Midtown versus South Fulton, the buyer and seller. And this is what I'm seeing, guys. I am seeing contracts that say that a buyer will pay X amount over the appraised value. Okay. Sometimes I'm seeing that with zero appraisal contingency, and I want to get into that in a little bit. But right now, I want to focus on that particular stipulation that I just read, because it's being interpreted differently by different folks, even brokers that I respect. I've had issues with, I'm not screen sharing, so I don't know what happened there. Excuse me, technical difficulty. I've had conversations with brokers that I highly respect who have a different opinion than I do on a statement like that. But if you accept as a listing agent a special stipulation that says the buyer will pay X amount over the appraised value, you are setting yourself up for a very big issue with your seller if the appraisal comes in super low. So the instance I'm talking about where there's a lawsuit pending right now is that the seller signed off on a purchase and sale agreement saying that he would sell the house to with that special stipulation that stated the buyer would pay X amount over the appraised value. The appraised value came in much lower than either party anticipated. And the seller said, no, I'm not going to sell the property for that amount. But they signed an agreement that said, agreeing to that special stipulation. So now we are in a lawsuit between that buyer and that seller. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of precedent is set in that court case to move forward, because some of the brokers that I've talked to said, well, so-and-so attorney said that you can't hold a seller to that they didn't agree to pay that price based on that appraisal. But my opinion is, and Deborah, you tell me if you disagree, is that if you sign a blanket statement like that, you've agreed to it. Okay, so let's think about that for a minute, guys. If you have a listing that's $600,000 and you have an offer for $600,000 and the buyer says that they will pay X amount over the appraised value, and the appraised value comes in at $500,000, your seller is not going to be very happy with, let's just say it was $20,000 that the buyer agreed to pay over the appraised value. So now they've gone from a purchase price of $600,000 to a $520,000 sales price. And that's what's causing the issues. And I'm telling you, I've seen this over and over and over again. Just had a discussion with an agent from Buckhead last week about this very same scenario. So what should we be doing to prevent this? What we should be doing is, in that special stipulation, we should counter that it must appraise for at least, I'm going to use this $600,000 as an example, and we are under contract for $600,000. The appraiser, and let's just say that the buyer is willing to pay $20,000 over the appraised value. I would say at that point, if you get a stipulation like that in a contract, that you should say, but the property must appraise for a minimum of $580,000. That way, your seller is guaranteed that $600,000 price point if the buyer is willing to pay $20,000 over the appraised value. Okay. Does everybody understand that? I want to have some discussion about this because it's very important and I want you all to understand that. So anybody have any questions or comments about what I just stated?
Hey, Tom.
Don't be shy.
Hey, Tom, this is Kirby. How you doing? This is Kirby. I have a question about that.
Yeah, for some reason, I'm having a hard time hearing. So bear with me 1 second. All right, let's try it again.
Can you hear me, Tom?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Well, this is Kirby Chokes. I have used that stipulation as a buyer's agent. And
I'm sorry, guys, I'm not able to hear anybody. Bear with me 1 second. Let me see if I can change my audio. All right, let's see if that does anything. Go ahead.
can you hear me now?
Oh, that's much better. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, this is Kirby Choate. I have used that stipulation in some contracts only when I kind of do the comps in the area, and I either can't find comps in the area or I can't find anything to match that price point that the seller's asking for. That way I feel like I'm protecting the buyer because some houses are being overpriced in the area because people are saying, okay, I can get all this money for my home. And I think that protects the buyer. But at the same time, I do talk with the listing agent if they have a question about it and explain to them why we're doing that. Like I say, either I can't find comps in the area to justify the price that they're listing it for, or I do find comps in the area, but it don't match the price point that they do have it listed at. So I would use that to kind of help my client, especially when they want to put in an appraisal gap.
Yeah, that is a difficult situation. I understand. You know, I think that, you know, if you're just going to have to come in at the best price you can, because there are agents that are still overpricing property, knowing that buyers are going to pay for it because they've got more cash than other buyers. And it's a difficult situation, but, you know, I just want to make sure that, you know, I can't solve every situation and with every listing and every buyer. But what I want you to make sure that you are doing is protecting the party that you're representing. Okay. So in the case I just was talking about, we are having major issues with that stipulation not having a minimum value attached to it. And so all I'm saying to you as a listing agent is that you need to make sure that there's a minimum attached to it. Okay. We are also seeing contracts where they've got zero appraisal contingency, but then they've got all this verbiage in there about if it doesn't appraise, then we can renegotiate and the buyer can get their earnest money back. That's not a zero appraisal contingency. And I'm also seeing this appraisal gap with a zero appraisal contingency. And it's one or the other, not both. So either you have a zero appraisal contingency and you go in knowing that you're going to have to pay the difference if it comes up short, and like, you know, doing a good job of looking for comps and making sure that if you had to meet an appraiser that you could justify the price that's on the contract. Otherwise, your buyer's going to either have to come up with a significant amount of cash or they're going to terminate and lose their earnest money. So that's what we want to try to prevent. But what I'm really asking you to do is to make sure that if you're receiving offers or writing offers, you don't want to wind up in court. Okay. So please put a minimum appraised value on there if you're writing a gap stipulation.
So Tom, I have a question. This is Cameron.
Hey,
When
Cameron.
situations, how's it going? With situations
Good.
like
How are you
these,
today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. With situations like these, when they do end up in court, does the court usually favor into, you know, hey, this is what the contract says and you signed it, so you have to come up off the house? Is that usually how these concepts go?
I can't answer that question because I have dealt with so many issues in court where depending on the judge you get, mainly on commission issues, they generally, the last magistrate court judge on a $16,000 commission gave us about $800 in commission, $1,000 towards our attorney fees, and it was a joke. And the buyer was definitely, he just defaulted. He just refused to close at the last minute. And so my thing is, we don't want to go to court because the only people that win going to court are the attorneys. So you may get a judgment for a commission, or in this case, who knows? We'll see what the judge decides in this case. And, you know, I'll share that with you once I know where it lands. But so we'll see. I don't know. There's just too many variables, and there's been too many issues where judges do things that I just can't believe that they do, but they do it. And the last thing we want to do is spend our time and energy and money in court.
Gotcha.
So it'll be interesting to see how this case turns out. I would be, you know, I'll be very surprised if a judge forces a seller to sell his house, but we'll see. More than likely, there'll be some kind of monetary settlement to the buyer. The other option for you guys, if you're writing special stipulations on appraisal gap, is that if it appraises for, I would say if it appraises for less than X amount, depending on what the sales price is, then all parties agree to go back to the appraisal contingency, present the amendment to reduce sales price, and renegotiate. That's another tactic that you can use if you're writing a special stipulation on an appraisal gap. But I mean, bottom line, the easiest thing to do is, if you're writing that special stipulation, is that depending on what you're under contract for and what the amount is that the buyer's willing to pay, the difference, if it appraises low, is to put a threshold of an amount that it must appraise for.
Hey,
Any
Tom,
other questions about this issue? Because it's a big one, guys. It's a very big one.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, this is Hirsch at InTown. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I have been using one of the approved, I guess, Wiseman STIPs. I just want to make sure I get your take on that being protective for typically the buyers is what I'm using for. But I was trying to put it in the chat. I couldn't find it, so I'm just going to read it. It says, in the event the property does not appraise for at least a purchase price, so it has that verbiage in there with the purchase price, buyer agrees to pay seller at closing the difference between the sales price and the appraised value in cash, not to use the failure of the property to appraise, to either terminate the agreement or ask for a reduction in sales price. And then, notwithstanding the above, if the difference is greater than this, then the buyer has the option to terminate if the purchase price is severely wrong, or if the appraised value difference is, super large in comparison to what they've agreed to. Is that, you think, solid in terms of representing the buyer?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
The thing that I want you to be aware of, guys, is that we're getting really squirrely offers. I just went over one with an agent in Decatur on Friday, and they had a 0 appraisal contingency. And then they had all this verbiage that if it appraised for a certain amount, that, they could negotiate and the buyer could get their earnest money back. That is not a 0 appraisal contingency. Okay, so just be clear with your seller and with your selling agents, or if you're a buyer's agent, just be real clear about what all of that means. Any other questions about the appraisal contingency special stipulation?
Tom, I got a question on something that I've been doing as of late. Most, I think, buyers, in order to be competitive, have to waive the financing contingency. So special steps indicate the financing contingency is waived, and then the appraisal gap stipulation is in there. Typically, if I'm waiving financing, I'm not putting in the loan contingency document, since we've waived that, and then there's also protection for the appraisal. Do you think that's okay to do, or would you change how that is? Put a number of days in there, let's say 10 days or whatever it is, and then have the stipulation to kind of add a layer of protection in there.
I think you have to weigh all of these decisions based on the financial ability of the buyer.
Okay.
So if they're in a position to waive financing, but they still want to have an appraisal contingency, you're just going to have to address that. I'm seeing fewer and fewer contracts where buyers are giving up the appraisal contingency. The market is shifting somewhat slowly, but it is shifting. And with interest rates where they're at, you just need to make sure of their financial ability and commitment to the purchase and sale agreement. And that's, on a case-by-case basis. Okay, any other questions about that, guys? It's a big one, so I just want to make sure that you are prepared. Always feel free to contact me or Deborah if you're in the Midtown office, and we'll be happy to review whatever it is that you need to have reviewed before you go under contract. So we're going to move on to another topic that Deborah wanted me to talk about, and that is retainer fees. And I don't know how many of you on this call are taking retainer fees. I know in the past, I've had agents who have made that a part of their whole brokerage agreement, whether it was with buyers or with sellers. But, there was a time a couple of years ago where they had changed that retainer fee paragraph to read that it could be paid directly to the agent. And so I guess that didn't go over very well, because now they've made it an exhibit, and the retainer fee is paid directly to the broker. Okay, so we don't have to deposit those funds. We can turn around and cut that check to the agent. But I want to make sure that you understand that those funds need to be paid to the broker. So Deborah has put in the chat. I'm sorry, Deborah, I thought it was an exhibit. It's a special stipulation.
Yeah, it's a special stipulation that we have. And then also, I think I put the retainer fee exhibit would be F-149.
Yeah, it used to be a part of the listing agreements, and then they changed it. But when it was a part of the listing agreement and the buyer brokerage agreement, at one point, they had changed the verbiage to be paid directly to the agent. And so I guess that got a little out of control, or brokers complained about it, because everything has to be run through the broker. And so now they've changed it back, and the buyer has paid the broker a retainer fee of X amount. This fee shall be deemed to be earned by broker at the time it is paid, and shall thereafter be the property of the broker, shall not be refundable to the buyer, and shall not be considered trust funds under any circumstances.
So the
So-
question is, Tom, that I just had one right before this broker chat. As the qualifying broker, what is your decision on that? And then I think it's more an accounting issue than it is an issue of agents doing this. And agents are doing this more and more with more of the tenants, because there's, you know, the rush to get these rental properties under contract. And usually there's multiple offers on that. So agents are saying, look, gas is a second mortgage, so you're going to help me pay for it, and I'm going to charge you a retainer fee. So do we allow them to have it paid directly to them? This special stip lets us know that it's not part of our trust funds, but it is still the property of the broker. But let's say, and this is my question to you, Tom, let's say a tenant or a buyer gets upset with the agent. They're going to call the deeper pockets, also known as Keller Williams, and they want their $200 back. Now what?
If they sign the agreement with this special stipulation in there, they're not entitled to those funds back, period. Now, guys, I always like to think about things in a different way. So if you're going to charge a buyer a retainer fee, for whatever reason, and I understand that, I would probably maybe think about that in terms of them paying you an extra commission at closing. That might be a cleaner way of dealing with it. Retainer fees are generally, if you're going to be putting a buyer in your car for an extended amount of time, you could charge a retainer fee for gas, whatever you wanted that money to be applied to. But you better make sure that you have them sign this special stipulation and make that part of your buyer brokerage agreement, because to Deborah's point, we get calls all the time about a consumer who's not happy with their agent and they want to be released from their brokerage agreement. And I haven't personally dealt with it, but Deborah, I'm sure you probably have, since you've brought it up, is that they want their retainer fee back. And they're not entitled to get that back. But maybe a way to circumvent that is to just say, at closing, the buyer will agree to pay X amount in additional commission outside of what the seller's willing to pay. Think about that.
Tom. This Joel. Can you hear me?
Hey, Joel.
How you doing? Because I know what you're saying. I know the agents too. They're like, hey, I'm putting people. I'm driving here and there, and gas isn't cheap. I do take the safer route though, similar to you, as far as a transaction fee at the end. It doesn't help if we terminate earlier, but it does help to get some of the compensation back from, you know, the initial part of driving them around and showing them homes and things like that.
Right.
So we take it's not bulletproof, but we do take the lesser of the evil.
Oh, can I put you on the spot?
Yes.
Would
No.
you role play with me how you talk about the transaction fee and give everyone on the call an example of what you charge, if you don't mind?
Sure.
I'll be the buyer.
Okay.
You want me to pay you what?
Well, Deborah, our goal is to make sure that this is one of your best experiences ever. And what we do is we charge a transaction fee, and what that does is it just helps us as far as helping with the transaction of getting it closed. You know, once you get under contract and then getting you closed. We have a coordinator And what that coordinator does is they make sure all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and so that everything goes as smooth as possible. Because Deborah, I mean, you want a smooth transaction, don't you?
Yes, but I have a question. Will I get that money back at closing?
No, actually, you'll pay that transaction fee at the closing. We don't collect it up front because we want to make sure we're going to do our job for you first. We want to make sure we do an exceptional job and get you to the closing table because that's what you want to be. You want to get closed on your home, correct?
Correct. Well, what if
Okay,
I'm not
great. So
happy
what
and I want to cancel?
you want to cancel the closing?
The-
Well, if we don't close, you don't pay. But if we
Okay,
do
all right.
close and we do our job, because I mean, obviously, if we do our job, then we should get compensated, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. So that's what will happen is there won't be any upfront fee, just at the closing. That's when you'll pay the $295 as far as for the transaction.
Okay. I'm good with that. Let's
Okay.
give Joel a virtual hand.
Good job, Joel. Good job. So I guess my question is, I don't really deal with the retainer fees a lot, or haven't had a whole lot of conversation about it. So, I mean, is it an issue? Deborah, are you having an issue with that in your market center?
Not an issue, but it has come up quite a bit in the last 2 or 3 months. And we've been going round and round as to who will receive it. Do we run it through the office? So on and so forth. Well, technically, without the special stip, yes, you run it through the office because Tom already said all funds, and we all learned in pre-license, all funds run through the broker. However, with this special stip, what it does, it protects so that the buyer can't come back or the tenant can't come back and say, and by the way, if it's a tenant, you would just change the words from buyer to tenant, that they wouldn't get the money back. I think the question is, how is it processed through the office? And that might be different in each market center. It shouldn't be, it should be the same. But I think that's really been the issue. Oops,
I would
sorry.
think that the issue for the market center would be to process it like a referral fee.
I agree. I mean, it'll just turn right around again. And,
Right.
you know, I don't know if we have to be a little bit more specific for people that are not capped yet. Do we take the royalty and the cap out, or do we just run it through and send it back out again?
Well, technically, any monies, and I'm going to defer back and let the team leaders make that decision. But technically, if you're with Keller Williams and you haven't capped, then any funds that we write a check to you for would include a deduction of your cap.
I agree with that. So with that being said, if you're going to charge a transaction fee, a retainer fee, or anything that you're expecting to receive from your customers or clients, then you need to do the calculation. If you're going to charge them $495, does that cut, and you really want to net $495, then that means your fee needs to be a little higher than $495. So that
Right.
when that 36% is taken out, you still net what you want to put in your pocket. It's
Right.
a simple math.
Yeah. That's exactly what I would do if you are an agent that likes to work with retainer fees. You know, and here's that, you know, do the math like Deborah said and tack on extra, because technically we're supposed to deduct the funds towards your cap on any funds that you receive as an agent.
Hey, Tom, I have another thing I want to bring up to the table here to see if anyone has experienced this. Over the weekend, I was helping an agent with a VA loan contingency, and the property did not appraise. And the buyer is well qualified. There were a lot of mistakes throughout the contract when I was able to review it, because we all know VA is 100% loan. So on the contingency, it should have said 100%, it said 90%. So I had to question all of that. Basically, the buyer started out with a conventional loan. There was an amendment that was done to change it from conventional to VA. The financing contingency, if everybody's following, was 2 days from binding. The VA contingency amendment was done outside of the financing contingency, the original financing contingency. The VA contingency, they added 2 days, not added, but put 2 days again on the form, but we all know that there's an amendatory clause. So what does that mean? That runs through closing, correct? Now, something changed, and this is my question to you, Tom, or anyone on the call that may have experienced this. Something changed, and I was not aware of it, in 2021, that an appraiser wrote the following words, and I'll put it in the chat after, that VA mandated escape clause, which is the amendatory clause, is not, and he put it in bold letters, contained in the contract. So when the seller said no to reducing the price, the buyer now wants to back out and get their earnest money back. And they are currently trying to work it out as we speak, but it looks like there's going to be a dispute. And oh, by the way, Tom, the attorney's holding the earnest money of about $9,000. So it's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Now, what
That'll be an interpleader for sure.
Yeah. So the thing that struck me is the VA contingency is clear about protecting that buyer, that it shall not incur any penalty. So remember, we did an amendment to change what type of loan from conventional to VA. So now all the things contained in that new form run with this new contract. But the appraiser threw a wrench in this when he or she, I don't know, said that the VA mandated escape clause is not contained in this contract. That is new verbiage. Has anyone experienced it? Tom, I have no idea. I'm investigating it today. Because to me, how I interpret that is we don't have an amendatory clause. Am I not reading that correctly?
Well, I think that's what his intent was, but nobody gives an appraiser the authority to interpret a contract. So, and let me get on my high horse just a minute. I have had so many issues with appraisers this spring, getting out of their lane and into somebody else's lane, and it's caused all kinds of havoc, guys. And so that appraiser had no right, in my opinion, to say anything about the contract. They're there to appraise the property, period.
Yeah, so since the seller had seen that and the agent sent it to me, it's like a smoking gun out there. I'm interpreting the contract, but then this piece of evidence from the appraiser is sticking in the seller's crawl. So
Deborah.
Now what? Yes, Joel.
Got a question. Okay, so it started off conventional, and then the amendment, there was an amendment to make it VA. Did they actually do a VA loan exhibit, or did they just?
Oh, no, they did it properly. They did an amendment and they also executed the VA contingency. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I always thought that took care of protecting the buyer as far as if the.
It does.
It does. It's the bigger question is in 2021, the lender is telling me that this statement that I read that it is not contained was changed last year. We have our lenders in office, lenders in our market centers that discuss all types of financing at sales meetings and things of that nature. I haven't heard anything about this statement being added to the appraisals. So I don't know if it was just this particular buyer or if this is a blanket statement. So that's why I'm putting it out there to see, and I'll type it in here to see if anybody recognizes it, but I've not experienced it, and it's been probably a year since I've done a VA loan myself, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, the problem I see with this is appraisers sticking their nose into a lane that they don't need to be in. It's not their purpose or their job to interpret a contract. And so, in my opinion, that was wrong. However, you guys know how I feel. If you've been on these calls before, you know how I feel about attorneys holding earnest money. That attorney is just going to interplead it. They're not going to be bothered with it. So, anyway, I would probably interpret that as the appraiser, it's not their job to interpret the contract, and the VA loan. It was switched to a VA loan, and the VA loan, if the contract falls short, allows the buyer to terminate without penalty, just like an FHA loan, period. End of discussion.
Doesn't that amendatory clause have to be signed by both parties to be enacted though? It's not like automatic, it has to be signed and sent by the lender to the seller and the buyer, so.
No, it's
No.
part of the VA loan contingency. So it just like it is with FHA. So I have seen those things sit separately, but they are part of the exhibit.
Okay,
And so if you change a conventional loan to a VA loan, then that amendatory clause is in that exhibit.
What I told the agent is, I mean, you really can't get around a VA and FHA amendatory clause, period. They could have overwritten it, but because they are protected, because remember, VA, they're not making the loan, they're guaranteeing the loan. So in order to guarantee the loan, that amendatory clause runs through closing. However, there could have been a discussion about, if it doesn't appraise, you could have put something in, if it doesn't appraise, you will still pay, because a vet can still, a VA loan or an FHA loan can still pay the difference, which is the topic of our broker chat today as far as appraisal gap. And there's no appraisal gap in this contract at all, by the way. And I think there should have been, because the agent told me that the buyer was well qualified with additional funds in the bank. The lender probably should not have told her that, but they did. So with having that knowledge, I probably would have written in there some type of appraisal gap that they still agreed. That would have overridden a little bit. They still would have had the amendatory clause, but then there would have been some peace of mind for the seller that they're qualified, they can pay the sale price that they agreed to. And now we are signing an appraisal gap that you agree to do that, because there is no penalty for that buyer to pay more. VA and FHA are only saying, this is all we're going to loan you, or the lender, I should say, this is all we're going to lend you, and VA will guarantee it.
Right. Wow, that was a good a good scenario to take a look at. Wow.
That's
Well,
what I said this weekend too. Wow.
yeah, wow. I know, right? It's a crazy market, guys, as you all know. All kinds of stuff's happening, and we are thrilled that you are on this call so that you can at least hear what we're dealing with and what we suggest. And at this point, I will I'll turn the floor open to anybody who has a question or a concern or issue that they'd like to talk to us about while we're here today. Nobody has anything. Everything's perfect in your world.
I asked a question. This is
Okay, go
Brenda.
ahead.
Okay, so I do see a lot of waiving these finance contingencies and appraisals. Like I received one. So if they put 0, said, okay, I don't want to, no finance contingency, but I will do a $3,500 appraisal gap. So let's say if by chance, and this agent, I didn't think what y'all are saying about putting the minimum in there, or haven't heard it put it in. So if this FHA come back and is super low, that's not acceptable to the seller, how would that work? Because they didn't put anything as far as finance. They waived the finance contingency, waived the appraisal contingency, and the house come back 10,000 short. And the seller said, oh no, I'm not going to sell it for that low. I don't care if they are giving me a $3,500 gap. What recourse would we have? Do we get the earnest money and keep going, or how does that work?
Was it a conventional loan?
No, FHA.
FHA, the buyer always gets their earnest money back. FHA and VA, always.
Oh, so waiving those contingencies doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, but because the amendatory clause protects the buyer. It's different. It's not like an appraisal contingency. That's why they call it an amendatory clause. But
Okay.
it
Well, we
doesn't
haven't
matter
signed
if the
that
house
yet.
doesn't appraise and the buyer doesn't want to move forward, they get their earnest money back.
Okay, so we haven't seen an amendatory clause yet. The lender hadn't sent that out.
Well, then if they terminate prior to that, then they will lose their earnest money.
Okay, yeah, we only have the FHA exhibit. We don't have the amendatory clause yet.
Amendatory clause is part of the FHA exhibit.
Oh. Okay,
Page 2. I think
Page
it's
2, okay.
paragraph 11.
Okay. All right,
So
thank
you
you.
do have it.
Is this the only
Yeah.
time that if you're using an special stipulation that it doesn't overrule what's already in the contingency? Because my understanding was if you put a special stipulation in, it's going to override the things that were already in the contract.
That is correct,
Okay.
except with FHA and VA, if it doesn't appraise per the VA or the FHA appraiser, and the buyer doesn't want to move forward, they will get their earnest money back. They're not penalized. So you've got to be very, very careful when you're structuring a deal or taking a deal with that. You just got to be careful because some of that doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
Guys,
Even if it expires, Tom?
Listen, let me say this. If you read the paragraph, there's 2 words you guys are not catching in FHA and VA,
Mhm.
and they are without exception. So they are protecting themselves on special steps or they don't care. Tom just said they don't care what you override without exception. And you'll only find those 2 words in the FHA and VA exhibit.
And this is Kirby. Hey, and that's why if you're listening as a listing agent, you would, if you're gonna put that appraisal gap in there, you might as well just put on your listing that you're not gonna accept VA and FHA. Right?
Yeah, I mean, if
I mean that'll save you a lot of headaches.
well,
I
I
mean,
mean, it's just like the point I made earlier, guys. People are writing appraisal gap stipulations in a contract with 0 appraisal contingency. It doesn't mean anything. There is no appraisal contingency.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if there's a gap in there or not, because there's no contingency.
Right.
And so agents don't understand it, but you guys do because you're better than they are. So that's why we're having this discussion today. It's just like, when I talked to the agent in Decatur on Friday about this 0 appraisal contingency, but then they had all this special stipulation about this scenario and that scenario, and the buyer can get their earnest money back. That's not 0 appraisal contingency.
Hey, Tom, and that's why if the buyer's willing to waive or able to waive the financing contingency, I don't put the financing doc on there because it's, you know, I guess I write it into special steps that the agreement is not subject to a financing contingency. And most of them are conventional, so there's no FHA or VA, but then there's also a stip that is written for how much over that they could pay depending on what the appraisal comes in for that I read earlier.
Yeah.
And in that case, there is no number of days. It's indefinite, right? So I'm protecting the buyer from, you know, whether the appraisal comes in 3 days or it doesn't matter. As long, even if it come in on closing day, they're still protected because I didn't put a number of days. Is that accurate, or would you say that's wrong?
Explain that to me again. We've got a VA. Is this on a VA and a FHA loan?
No, just a conventional loan. Buyer
On
waives
a conventional
financing.
loan, and you're putting zero financing, zero appraisal.
Well, I'm not including that doc at all. I'm writing a special step saying.
Okay, so basically
it's
you're
not
writing
subject to.
an all cash deal, not subject to
Right.
that appraisal or that exhibit.
Yep.
So yeah, essentially whatever if they have an appraisal and it comes in $100,000 less than the sales price, they still have to pay the sales price.
Well, no, the stip indicates what the max would be.
What the max would be. Yes.
Yeah.
then
So
that's-
you know, on
yeah.
600,000, it might be something like $25,000-$30,000.
Yeah.
So
I'm
it
sorry,
says
I
that
missed
on there.
that point.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Mhm.
correct.
Yep. And that way, there's not a number of days that we're fighting, because appraisals can take 2 days. It can take, 14 days. We don't know what that looks like in certain scenarios. And so I've found that little trick and I've used it and not really had an issue with it, but I just want to make sure that I've not had an issue with it because it's bulletproof and not because, it just hasn't come up yet.
Well, I'm not saying you will never have an issue with it, because at some
Mhm.
point, some seller's going to say, hell no, I'm not selling the house for that. And
Mhm.
you're going to wind up, your clients are going to wind up in court, like the couple that are in court right now that Deborah and I have been dealing with.
Mhm.
I would just make it very clear to that listing agent, what the intent is, so that everybody's on the same page.
Sure.
Because you may not have had an issue with it yet, but you may have an issue with it if the seller puts his foot down and says, no, I'm not going to sell it for that.
Mhm.
Even though they agreed to it. That's, we're dealing with a court case right now, that very scenario.
Hey, Tom, I have a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
Do we have, or are we planning to potentially develop some type of workflow to address some of these various, scenarios? Because, some of these transitions are just somewhat, never the same, right? There's always something that's different. And so I know that it would be difficult to develop something that would cover everything, but again, do we have something that, outlines and kind of illustrates the workflow of a standard, air quote, standard transaction?
We do not, because every transaction is unique in itself. And what we do offer are these broker chat sessions twice a month. We also offer in-house contract training. And you have a qualifying broker who's been in the business for 24 years. So you need to use my knowledge to help you if you need help with something. If you're in Midtown, you've got Deborah Blue, who is a wonderful broker, very intelligent, very seasoned, and she's there to help the agents in Midtown. So, those are the resources that we have, because we can't really write a manual on something like that, because every transaction's different. Every buyer's different, every seller's different. Their financing is unique in itself. And so we can't really do that. You're just going to have to call the broker and have a discussion with them, and we'll guide you in the right path to make it as pain-free as we can.
I think, is this Tracy who just said that, was speaking?
Hey, Tracy.
Yes, that's correct.
Tracy, if there's something that you want to present to Tom or to me, or, you know, an idea that you have, we can look at it, but I agree with Tom. Every transaction, you know, even though we see some of the same repeat things, that's why we've got this broker chat to talk about the repeat things. But to put something together, I mean, I can't think of a way to do it as of a workflow matrix or anything like that. I give out when I teach contracts, and I'm sure Tom does this as well, he gives an idea and I give an idea of what a complete contract looks like, whether you're writing a conventional, a cash, an FHA, a lease. I go through that and we go through the exhibits. What's more important is that you guys understand why you're using exhibits, why you're writing a special stip, why you're adding an amendment, and what the contract says. Because anyone in Midtown knows when they call me, after I say, hello, how are you? It's what does the contract say?
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
One more thing I wanted to speak to on zero financing, zero appraisal, that we also are having issues with, and you all have heard me, maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But if you are presenting an offer with zero financing, zero appraisal, you better have that earnest money in hand. Because, and if you're a listing agent and they're presenting an offer with 0 days of financing and appraisal or due diligence or whatever the situation is, you better make sure that they have that earnest money in hand and do not accept an offer under those circumstances with the earnest money due in 5 days. Because I can't tell you how many issues we are also dealing with where the buyers change their mind and they haven't submitted the earnest money because it wasn't due yet, and we're not getting it. And guess what? That other party is due those funds. So if you're a listing agent or a buyer's agent and you're presenting an offer or taking an offer with zero due diligence, zero financing, zero appraisal, any of the combination, you better make sure you have that earnest money up front before you get that offer signed off on.
Okay, but Tom, with the being FHA or VA, you get the earnest money. From what I'm hearing and understanding at this point, everything was zero, including due diligence. It doesn't matter because, you know, if we got it 2 days, 3 days later, they still can get their earnest money back if they decide not to buy. Unless I interpret this wrong.
Well, the only reason they can decide not to buy is if the amendatory clause comes in short and they don't want to move forward because of the sales and the seller doesn't want to reduce the sales price. That's the only way they can get out of it. They still need that earnest money. We still need that earnest money up front. And so I think there's just too many situations going on in the market and in our market centers where earnest money is being delivered 2 or 3 days after we go binding. And that is not a good thing by any shape or form.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
like you guys are skipping over the very first option at the time of offer. It's like no one is reading that first one and they're going straight to blank days from binding or some others. The first one, for a reason, says at the time of offer. And for those of you that want to charge retainer fees for your time, wouldn't you want to make sure you have earnest money before you start showing property? Wouldn't you want to make sure that there's some skin in the game before you present to a seller other than just the financing? What skin in the game? This putting 2 days due diligence, but 5 days for the earnest money, that's you're up for disaster right there, because they're going to walk and they're going to go, well, they don't have my money, so I'm out of here. That's what's happening.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how much time and energy I'm spending on that particular issue all over the place. We don't have the earnest money. We're the holder. They're coming after us because it hasn't been collected. And the contract was written poorly. and you didn't collect the earnest money up front. So we've all got to do a much better job of that, please. All right, guys, it is 1 o'clock. Oops, technical. It is 1 o'clock. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. We will be back with you with Deborah leading the call. Let's see. On Monday, the 23rd at noon, and we hope to see you there. All right. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you got something out of it. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.